Okay. Good evening. Calling this meeting to order at 7:31 on December 15th. Welcome, everyone. And as per usual, we'll start with Keith and the weather. And thanks for nothing today, Keith.
Doesn't take a weatherman.
Been thinking about you all day.
At least it wasn't snow today.
Yeah, that's true. Or
But
sleep.
that may be coming. If you're dreaming of a white Christmas, you may get your wish about a week from now. And you know, we talk about conversational snow and then sweepable snow, shovelable snow. In another week it may be plowable snow.
Oh, really?
Remember, I've told everybody
Okay.
that this is what we should be expecting this winter.
Get
And
out your
Decem-
Rolodex for snow.
December, you know, would be pretty cold, and we're going into a deep freeze.
Mhm.
So that pretty much sums it up. The rain tonight is over. We had about 3/4 of an inch here at the weather station. Some places had between 1 and 2. We never got the freezing rain. We never got any ice, but that's what we predicted yesterday, that we wouldn't have to worry about that here. Even in most of the county and in the northern and western suburbs, there were no problems with that. But drizzle for most of the night now, that's all we're down to, is very light rain or drizzle. And then a nice day, but albeit on the breezy side tomorrow. And the weekend is looking nice, but getting increasingly colder. 45 Friday, it may struggle to get out, Saturday may struggle to get out of the 30s on Sunday.
Thanks.
So, any questions?
Okay.
So
Okay.
it'll be a
Okay.
white Christmas?
It looks that way.
My
and it looks,
12-year-old's gonna be very
Wow.
excited.
There may
She's
be-
never
Okay.
had a white Christmas.
there may be,
But not a white Hanukkah.
When does
Well,
Hanukkah
like-
start?
Yeah.
Sunday
Same
evening.
week.
Sunday?
Yeah.
you mean this Sunday?
Yeah.
No,
No. Okay.
but,
But we got 8 days, so.
Well, yeah, it'll be
Eight
by the
crazy
fifth,
nights.
by,
Right, you've got a
your,
lot of chances
by the
there.
fifth candle, you might.
there could be a couple of storms.
Yeah.
There could be
Okay.
a couple of storms. The first shot would be a week from now and then right after Christmas. The
Excellent.
chances of a white Christmas here are 8%.
Eight.
The last time we had a true white Christmas here where it actually snowed appreciably on Christmas Day was 1962,
Holy cow.
when I was only 20 years old. How about that?
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Keith.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. We haven't done this in a while. Approved previous meeting minutes.
Yeah.
Well, we've approved them.
We've
just
approved them,
not
but we haven't-
necessarily on the record.
Yeah, so
as
I-
a formal item.
It's a formal item
Yeah.
tonight, so I guess does someone want a motion?
I'll move to approve
Yeah,
them.
I will second
Second,
that.
all in favor, say aye.
I
Thank you very much. We do have a quorum, but I have to say that I know Jeff has been very involved with the U.S.-Africa Leadership Summit that's taking place as we speak, so he apologizes. He was hoping to dial in. I'm not sure he's been able to, but he's here in spirit and doing great work downtown. Let's move to the building administrator, to Doug. I think he's on the phone, so and unmuted.
Hi, good evening. At 3506 Bradley Lane, their building permit expired on December 9th. Back in November, the applicants requested an extension until February, but this week they have revised that to say they will be completed by the end of January, and they need an extension, but they requested the village waive the $2,000 extension fee. At 3508 Bradley, the property owner had submitted a building permit application to add a 2-story addition at the rear of the existing house. The village issued the permit on November 25th. At 3417 and 3419 Cummings Lane, we have completed the initial review of the plans for tearing down the existing house and building 2 houses in its place, and we're waiting for them to address the comments. At 3419 Cummings Lane, the owner submitted an application to demolish the existing house and construct a new house on November 22nd. That's the one with the 2 lots, and we're waiting for those plans. At 7200 Dellfield, A right-of-way license agreement has been prepared and is pending signatures from the applicant and the village. At 151 Quincy Street, they submitted an application to remove the existing house and build a new house. That village permit was issued on November 23rd. At 162 Raymond, village right-of-way license agreement has been prepared and waiting for signatures. 3500 Raymond, the staff has completed the second review of the application and sent comments to the applicant. And finally, at 3412 Taylor, that's the house at the low point in Taylor with the white sandbags in their driveway. They have submitted a conceptual plan to remove the garage and raise the driveway to make it just a driveway above the street. We're waiting for them to submit plans to the county and get county approval, but it looks like it will be a minor change as far as we're concerned. So we're working with the applicant to get that approved, and that completes my report.
A quick question on the 3506 Bradley, where they're requesting an extension with waiving the fee. Does that require council approval, or can it be done administratively? Ron, how do you read that?
I'm looking at the code right now. I don't recall whether our code requires a showing of no change in circumstances for an extension. Some codes do that.
I don't recall any wording to that effect at all.
Okay, yeah, let me
Of anything
take a
about
quick
that.
look.
The one thing I can add about
Yeah.
that is he called me directly and said the county did waive the fees for their extension because it's just a month and it's due
Right.
to supply chain issues with the final
Right.
portions of their.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out administratively what we have to do it. Whether you could do it administratively or whether we need a council.
Speak of the devil.
Well,
You made it. All right.
Hey, friends.
okay, perhaps we can address
Okay,
that
so
later.
yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
found it. It's in section 6306C. The code enforcement officer can grant an extension in writing on payment of the extension fee, and the code enforcement officer can impose conditions with respect to the extension grant necessary for the public health, safety, or welfare.
Okay,
Or, and upon a reasonable showing that there has been no material change in circumstances. And
Good.
despite due diligence by the permittee, additional time is necessary. So it is an administrative approval, subject to those standards.
good. Thank you, Ron. That clears that up. Okay.
Great. Thanks a lot. No other questions for Doug? Okay, well, let's open it up to resident comments. If you want to raise your hand electronically or visually, we'll call on you and unmute you at that time. Holding all your comments for a little later, huh? Oh, no, here they go. All right, let's start with Larry, and then we'll go to Peter, and then Elizabeth Goldberg in that order. Larry, you're unmuted. Can you hear us? We can't hear you, but you're not muted, so. Well, while we wait for Larry, let's go to Peter.
Okay, thank you. I would like to speak a bit about the election plan that is up for consideration by the council at this meeting. I attended the election committee meeting on Tuesday evening, and at that meeting, George McAleese was elected chair, as you no doubt know, and George assured us that the election plan that he had submitted only briefly before that was based on last year's election rules, and that only minor changes had been made. He then spent most of the committee meeting asking his committee to consider and approve a number of very minor changes, such as dates and schedules. That plan was then approved by the committee with a quick vote and not a word of controversy about the substance of the plan. However, having spent several hours this afternoon reviewing the proposed plan, I can assure you that the changes from last year are far from minor. Indeed, they are very substantive and very serious. Proposals are rife with ambiguity, provide George and the committee with a great deal of discretion as to how the election shall be run. And while the final result may seem superficially similar to the plan the council approved last year, it is in fact dramatically different. I am convinced that with this plan, our community can have no assurance whatever that this year's election will be fair and unbiased. I urge you not to accept the plan that the chair has submitted to the council within the last day or so. I urge you to adopt instead either the plan that was originally submitted by the then acting chair, or simply re-adopt the plan that was approved by the council last year. That plan was an excellent plan. The acting chair made a few minor changes to it, but both of them are vastly superior in terms of fairness and unbiasedness to the one that George has submitted. I know that I've been a little bit vague in what I've been saying. I intend within the next day, I would suppose, to submit to the council a list of problems that I see with this election plan that are very substantive. They go to matters of the accuracy of the voter roll, whether the level of ballot security, allow the possibility that statements will be submitted after nominations have closed, and that information about who's been nominated may be passed to favored candidates. Has removed the assurance that the forum will be held on Zoom, ensuring that there will be many fewer people who will be able to attend it. George has played very loose with all of the timing, the forum, when the ballots will go out, when the election packet will go out, which means that we really have no idea how things will work. But George's plan seems to give a hurry-up schedule for the entire election, getting the forum done quickly, getting the ballots in people's hands as quickly as possible. Under his plan, people could be voting by the end of March, 2 months ahead of Election Day. And this, of course, produces a biased result, because people who are not known to the electorate will be disadvantaged by such a scheme. This is not a good plan, and I urge you to consider very, very carefully before you adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
We'll look forward to your comments, Peter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Elizabeth Goldberg, please.
Good evening, everyone. As Peter, I also attended the election committee meeting on December 13th. I have two questions to share with the council in that regard. First, though, a brief background on the facts that lead up to the questions. The acting chair of the VMA Elections Committee, Paul Weller, was responsible for preparing and presenting a draft of the 2023 election plan and procedures to the VMA Council for consideration at their December 15 meeting tonight. He did so, being quite faithful to the existing 2022 election plan with only 6 minor changes. I went through it myself, line by line, and I can confirm that. That draft is dated December 3rd, Paul Weller's original draft, and he presented it to the council on December 5th. This was publicly available to council members and committee members, and was later posted on the VMA website, where I saw it before the meeting. At the meeting of the election committee on December 13th, George McAleese was elected chair of the VMA Election Committee. George discussed adjustments to the acting chair's December 3rd election plan, and votes were taken on adjustments to the December 3rd plan. The votes that were taken at the meeting were votes to modify the December 3rd election plan. But towards the end of the meeting, the new chair surprisingly asked the committee to vote on his own election plan, individually developed, which one of the two committee members had not seen or reviewed, contradicting the committee's expressed votes on adjustments to the December 3rd plan and creating quite a bit of confusion. The new chair asked the elections committee to accept his own draft of the election plan and took a vote. This draft has not been seen by residents until this afternoon, when it was circulated by the council, nor was there an opportunity for residents to comment prior to a vote being taken. The
And
residents
just to be
who
clear,
attended
there's
the
no
December
vote being
13
taken,
meeting
Elizabeth?
had no, pardon?
Just to be clear, there's not a vote, no vote is being taken on it today. This is just a presentation of it to the council today, and there's a
Fine,
30-day
that's-
review
okay,
period.
that's
Just
fine.
FYI. Go ahead, sorry.
Possible introduction.
Thank you for
Yes,
that
there'll be a
clarification.
vote
The
on it.
residents who attended the
Well, but
December
not on
13
the
meeting had no
substance.
opportunity to comment before a vote of the election committee was taken. In the public comment period at the very end of the meeting, all residents attending unanimously objected to the breach of procedure. Question 1. Does the council believe it is procedurally correct to dismiss, disregard, and throw out the version of the 2023 draft election plan and procedures prepared in a timely and consultative manner and sent to by the acting chair to the council, where it was already submitted for consideration at the council meeting on December 15th, and replace it with a new version prepared by the new chair elected only on December 13th, a version that was not seen by residents nor posted for comment and not presented to the council in advance? I do not believe it is procedurally correct. Second question. Furthermore, what is the role of council liaisons to committees? Is one of the roles to object to incorrect procedural issues? If so, there should have been an objection to those incorrect procedures at the election committee meeting on December 13th, and that did not happen. Thank you for allowing me to make this comment.
Thank you.
Right.
I don't know if we want to respond to this. Just so you know, just on the record, I'm not participating in any of these election committee meetings. I'm not taking any point of view here ultimately in the creation and the details just because I'm in cycle whether I run or not. My question in return is the document that Paul presented, was that approved when he presented it to the council by the committee itself? Because I think the committee was lacking a third committee member. So that's my question as well. Procedurally, I don't have an answer. If it was a full committee that approved his draft version, that's one thing. If there wasn't, I'm not sure what the process is other than in an open meeting, the three committee members discussing a draft. Whether it had been presented before or not, that's the process in an open, in that setting. I also personally have questions myself. This is deja vu all over again here, as Peter and the rest of you know. Last year's election plan seemed to have been approved through much, blood, sweat, and tears. But it was, I think, ultimately a good plan. And so to me, it was just a change of dates, probably necessary for this year. So those are my editorial comments. Not answering you directly here, but just my initial thoughts. I'm happy to open it up to other council members.
Well, you stole what I was going to say, because I did attend the meeting, and it was deja vu all over again, so you beat me to it. And I'm also in cycle, too. I attended just as a council member. The liaisons are Arthur, last year Andrew, and now Jeff.
Yeah.
I could see where residents would be confused by the process, but to me it looked like the three committee members were kind of workshopping the plan that was being presented at the time. But I can see where these comments are.
Yeah. One quick comment. a confusion arose, and I will acknowledge that because the acting chair had submitted a document. The newly elected chair at the meeting had sent out another document to the members at least a week before that they had a chance to review. And so there were these two documents out there, and it was not clear. But at the meeting, all of the changes to the proposed documents submitted by the newly elected chair, they're all reviewed, they're all voted on, they're all accepted. And so the procedure went through with the committee members, so I saw no problem.
And what's the
going on.
obligation of the committee in terms of a draft plan to circulate a draft plan that has not been debated by the committee, to circulate such a draft plan to the community before the committee meets? Is there
I think it's what's a good word? It's nice to have, but not necessary.
okay? I mean, I guess that's
I
just a
believe
question.
that's correct. There is no requirement to submit. You submit an agenda in advance and then discuss the items on the agenda. But even then, you don't have to stick exactly to an agenda.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
it's
as
a
I
guide.
recall from last year, when we received the final plan that was presented, we still had the ability again to tweak and get resident comments.
Yeah,
You know, we
right.
went through it
Yeah.
line by line.
And there's going to
And
be,
just to harken back to last year, I remember receiving that at like 5:30 or 6.
That's right,
The
just
night of
before
a
the
council
meeting.
meeting, so
Right.
there must
And-
not be a duty
right,
to
and scanning
circulate.
through it at the last moment.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah,
have a
that's
question,
right.
just to our
Yeah.
senior
Jeff, feel free to
people who
chime in.
have served longer on the council. Has this come up with this dynamic on the committee before, where like different committee members submitted different plans, reviewed different like plans line by line? It just seems to be kind of a recurring.
There also seems to be, I mean, a fear factor that something is going on here with these
I know.
elections, and I feel
think
like,
it's too much election news.
yeah. But anyway, Jeff, thoughts?
National.
Yeah, I just a couple things, and I won't take up too much airtime. So first of all, just appreciate the resident comments and recognize that there were several plans, and recognizing that there are folks, quite frankly, who are kind of upset. I also want to acknowledge George and the rest of the committee. I thought, when whoever was in attendance, I know I was, Arthur, others, they listened very carefully to a lot of comments. Some were not exactly, let's say, supportive of how things were going. But again, I'm not here to take sides on that. I have my own thoughts, and when we come to take a vote on introduction, I'll express those. But I do want to say, in all fairness, recognizing that there were two plans submitted, and what Andrew had mentioned was, unfortunately, due to circumstances outside of everyone's control, the committee itself, the election committee, had dwindled down to a number that made discourse and discussion you just couldn't do it because of that. And again, that was not to anyone's fault. I don't think George, and again, with all due respect, George or Paul had originally, been the head of the committee. So I believe that everyone has been doing the best that they can in good faith. With that said, I do want to say something just procedurally. It's not perfect. I do agree. I personally, and I think, everyone here has shared their opinion, in the ideal scenario, there would have been a plan that was voted on that had been circulated to the public well in advance. I don't think there's anyone around this table that would say that should not be the archetype. I think, though, given the circumstances and everything that had occurred with the attrition and everything else, that the committee did the best that they could do under the circumstance. There's without a doubt, I believe that. I truly do. And then the final thing I just put out there, which again is not necessarily the ideal, because we would have liked, I think everyone would have liked, a plan that had been voted on and would have circulated to the community, is look, we do have, after introduction tonight, with the assumption that there'll be the votes to do that, there'll be a 30-day period for feedback. And Peter and others, I just want to say candidly, we hope that you submit all the feedback line by line, and we will all look at this. Everyone will, because we value your opinion, we value everyone's opinion. So look, if the ideal circumstance, maybe there would have been at least a week or so before the introduction to get that feedback. I think everyone did what they could in the circumstances that they were dealt with. No one wanted what had happened, especially knowing the personal situation of why we're here. But we're going to do the best that we can with what we have, which is now, after what we would expect an introduction perhaps tonight, a 30-day window, and we want everyone's feedback as quickly as possible, so then we will be able to take a vote. That's just kind of my thoughts on it.
And I think we got to that point last year as well, through a lot of drama, but at the end of the day, I think most everyone here was in attendance when when we went line by line through the differences and the changes, and I think there was broad agreement that it turned out to be, supported by most folks that were engaged, so.
And I apologize, one last thing I just want to share is, look, I know no matter what I say or anyone says around this table, anything that is said about the election piece is not going to make folks happy. It's just the way it is, and it's I love the community. They're very engaged, and we won't be perfect, and we'll make mistakes. I had spoken to individual members of the committee. They were conversations that were personal conversations, but I do appreciate, and also community, I do appreciate the feelings. I do appreciate the stress, and I feel you. I really do, but I do believe in my heart everyone has come together under the circumstances to do the best that we can. And now as a community, we've got 30 days. Let's get the feedback in, and then we'll have that open session and we'll take a vote. Because at the end of the day, we do know the sun will rise, and we do know that we will have an election, and that's where we are.
Good. Thank you. Larry, Susan, Jean, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good. All right, so I lost video doing this, so otherwise I would be up on video. One quick thing, that 3506 Bradley, that's absolutely true. There has been, it's gotten even worse, the supply chain issues. You can't even install new electrical meters because the mountings are not available. So if you can please waive that, it really is, it's not, that's something no one could have anticipated. As to the comments about last night or the other night, maybe the council needs to look at an outline or regulations for committee function. Because here's what I saw at that meeting. I saw that an agenda with a packet that contained a draft document was put out in time so that the village citizens could look at it and think about it and put some input into it. And we're fully prepared to not waste people's time and talk coherently about the plan that was being offered. When the chairmanship changed on the committee, there was absolutely no mention by the new chair, and I believe it was his absolute responsibility, that if he decided that he was not going to use that document, but use some other document that the village citizens had not seen, and of the two other members, one of them had not seen it and was unaware of it, and to proceed and ask for votes and approvals on the existing plan that Paul had prepared and got those things, and then wait till the end of the meeting to explain that those votes, which were in good conscience based upon everyone's knowledge of Paul's plan, to then decide to try to turn it around and say they were going to be added by his personal document. And he's asking for people to vote on a document that one of them hasn't even seen. And during the meeting,
when he's asked to release that document, which he claims he gave to others a week before, so that those of us, the citizens attending, could review it before this meeting, he refused to do so. I find that conduct unacceptable, and I don't think there's anything that'll change it unless the council does not allow that. If you can't, you shouldn't have a discussion of a document, supply with a document, and then in the middle, ask people to vote on something they can't see, especially when the truth of you saying, oh, there's only minor changes, is not true. It's just wrong. You can say as far as I'm concerned, it's unethical, and it's why no one wants to volunteer and we need volunteers badly. It's because of that horrible treatment. Enough said.
Thank you. Susan.
Thank you. I think that it is true that during the meeting, the election committee meeting on Tuesday, the December 3rd election plan that was put out to the public was workshopped by the committee members. The acting chair's December 3rd plan is the one that was discussed during the entire meeting when votes were taken on adjustments that George and others talked about. So the votes were taken on the December 3rd plan. But then at the very end, surprisingly, George asked, so let's take a vote on, we'll take a vote on the plan that I circulated. Is that okay? But it was a very unusual thing, because why would you suddenly say that you're voting on your plan when the entire committee has looked at this other one and made votes on it? So it really undercut the authority of what was done last year at much effort by the council chair, Andrew, and others. It undercut the acting chair's role. Arthur, when you described there were two plans circulating, that was confusing. Arthur and other council liaisons and everyone there realized that the acting chair's plan is the one that had been put out. So I think if there was be a little more support for residents who do put a lot of work in, it will keep residents engaged and feel connected. And if you feel that your contribution is not valued or is undercut within these meetings, it's going to alienate people, and they're not going to want to serve, because the volunteer landscape that each of us has with limited time is, I want to be in an environment where my contributions are valued. So I think we can all understand that, and hopefully the council liaisons, the council as a whole, will take some responsibility for having an atmosphere that is valuing of input. Since it sounds like we're not going to have a lot of other chance to say this, I wanted to say that in terms of oversight, that's important, but also in the ethics ordinance, I know that's going to be discussed today. I think that there needs to be, it wasn't clear to me what kind of oversight there is already for the ethics committee, and I know we're talking today, you all will be, about having this ordinance apply to all volunteers. And even in the meeting of the ethics committee the other day, they said, we're not going out in front of the council on this. In fact, this idea to have this ethics code apply to all volunteers came from a council member. So it made me realize, so the ethics committee is doing things at the bidding of a council member. And so I guess for me, I have to wonder, where is the oversight on that? Because if you have a problem or a question as a resident with this particular set of residents that's been deputized to potentially prosecute other residents or bring allegations of unethical conduct, who determines, it confused me, because I thought, I don't really know why we're having this committee do what it does. And I'm also concerned about, at the committee itself, there was something said that doesn't seem like there's been any negative ideas about this plan. We might as well vote for it or something. Well, a lot of residents were logged in and we couldn't talk because increasingly the windows that residents have to give their views has been narrowed by the council and by the committees. So we used to be that you could speak during a committee meeting. Then it was resident comments at the beginning and resident comments at the end. Right now, it's resident comments at the end for at least one or two of the committees I went to. And the chat function was even disabled. I don't know if here we have it, but we didn't the other day. So when we don't have a lot of space to give views, and let's say we're concerned about something the ethics committee has done, I don't understand where the oversight is. I don't see a reason to apply the code to even more volunteers when we already had a volunteer who resigned after having the code apply to some other committees. I just don't see the reason to apply it to even more volunteers. And maybe we should have the council members who think it's important to have that apply to more people. Maybe they should be speaking up as well as this committee for why it should be applied to more people. But anyway, I'm just against that. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope that, I'm sorry, one last little thing. I'm really concerned that about certain volunteers not being allowed to serve on committees. I feel that we're kind of normalizing bias by not allowing certain people to volunteer. I don't know if someone might have a little personal vendetta or a problem with a volunteer or resident. I would just so encourage you to speak directly with that resident. If you're a council member and you're unhappy with something that was done in the past, let's get a mediator in. Let's get a facilitator in. Let's have a big group conversation. Let's hear some evidence. If there's not evidence, let's move on. Because I think this community is being torn apart by bias. I don't think it's right to have a new manager, an assistant manager, and new committee members come into this situation and have it be like the Sneechies with stars on their bellies and the Sneechies without stars on their bellies, and they've got to learn who's okay to talk to and who's okay to have on a committee member on a committee and who's not. I mean, I don't want that kind of bias to be passed on and rippled out because of a few people's not directly addressing their own concerns with each other from the past. So finally, thank you very much. I hope we'll continue to be mindful that having a non-hostile and supportive work environment and volunteer environment is essential to having volunteers and residents be willing to serve. And it is a privilege that you have people willing to serve currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And I think it's a privilege to be surrounded here by a lot of volunteers around this table as well who are willing to serve. And I just want to say I'm not sure what's going on at the committee level, but I've been getting criticism because of too much time for residents throughout the council meetings since I became chair. So I don't think that has been the case here in terms of limiting residents from speaking during council meetings. Jean, please.
Hi guys. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Andrew, I'm really surprised to hear you say that and to conclude or initiate your remarks that people say we talk too much.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I've been getting criticism. People don't want to stick around for council meetings because I opened up the process where you can speak throughout the meetings.
But
That's
oh my
what I'm
goodness,
saying.
but that's not your problem. Okay,
It's not. I'm not changing it. So
Okay, good. This is what I think people would want.
yeah.
Yikes. I hardly know where to start, but I'm going to try my best, okay? I was absolutely shocked that at last night's, at the elections committee meeting, I thought we were talking about a draft that was presented, that was posted by Paul Weller. I saw no other draft of the elections committee recommendations, procedures, blah, blah. So I went over those, that was fine. all of a sudden in the meeting, I don't know how it happened, but I was thoroughly confused. Something else came up. Somebody else's draft came up with no discussion about, well, why was what was in the initial draft not good? Why did it need to be changed? Why did something else? There was no discussion of that. And then today I went online and I found what was presented to the council. And what I saw, I tried to compare the document that Chairman Weller put up at the time with the one that was allegedly voted on. I was thoroughly confused. And I saw that there was like bizarre changes in dates. There was nothing that explained what are these changes, why were these changes needed? Were people being disenfranchised? Was somebody not going to get what they needed? Is somebody not going to be able to be a part of the process? There was nothing there that showed me why we needed not to review Paul Weller's comments, and I didn't even know who made the other comments. I was not clear at all. It just wasn't discussed, and all of a sudden I look at the draft today, and we've changed March 25th to March 22nd. We've changed February 23rd to February 20th. I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, based on what does any of this make any sense? I'm sorry, I must be out to lunch. But we didn't get a chance to discuss it. And all of a sudden, we have people, then there's the other thing, the who can vote, voter rolls were allowed to be changed to 8 p.m. That all of a sudden in this document that was presented, 12 p.m. instead of 8 p.m., 12 p.m. What was the thinking? Why would we want to change a deadline from 8 p.m. to 12 p.m.? It seems so arbitrary, capricious. That's always a favorite word. Why? And what's the question is, what's the justification? There was no explanation that night of that meeting. Let's get an explanation. And I don't want 30 days layover for me to have to say, what were you thinking when you proposed this change? What was the reason that it should be 8 o'clock at 12 noon instead of 8 o'clock at night? Anyway, I'll stop talking. None of it makes any sense to me. I'll shut up. Okay? Thanks, guys. But thanks for all your work, Andrew. And thank Paul.
Thanks.
Paul. Thanks. All right.
Thank you, Gene.
I'm done. I'll unmute myself. Okay,
Thank you.
sweetie.
Marty and Peter.
I'll mute myself.
Marty and Peter, and then we're moving on. And Larry, I know your hand's up, but you'll get a second round here maybe during that discussion. So, Marty, please.
I want to echo what other citizens have had to say here. I was at that meeting on Tuesday night too, and everything they've said is absolutely correct in terms of what I saw. There's a deeper issue here. Well, there are several deeper issues here. One of the things that happened at that meeting, besides confusion about which plan was actually being amended, was that George, talked about a couple of minor details, but he didn't even mention the big stuff, that his plan differed from Paul's December 3rd draft and from what the council approved last year, which, by the way, I thought was quite good. I want to just take a minute to thank the council, and especially Andrew, because I know last year you put a lot of time into making sure we actually ended up with good regulations. And I guess I have to ask, when is enough is enough? I mean, this is the second time we've had kind of a bait and switch go on with two different documents, one of which comes in at the last minute, the residents haven't had a chance to see, and obviously we care. It's good that we care. But we just have to stop this two documents nonsense. And the changes that George didn't mention when he was asking them to vote on some minor stuff were huge. I think Peter had alluded to this or said this directly. I mean, we no longer have an independent election under George and Georgia because he took out the language that the council worked so hard to put in last year about how the election committee independently verifies and certifies a voter roll. That's not in there anymore in George's version. It was in Paul's. Paul's version tracked last year's rights almost exactly. But suddenly that's a huge structural change. because if you don't have an independent committee verifying and certifying the voter roll, you no longer have an independent election. The voter roll determines who issues the ballots. That's huge. Another change that is in there, Peter talked about some vagueness. Well, it did say, remember last year there was a discussion about how important it is to mail out the village election info packet. It has the candidate statements and the formal notices of the forum and election. That's now gone. There's a language change there that just says that you have to mail an election packet. Well, that could refer to the ballot packet. So actually, in Georgia's draft, that whole business about so important to residents about having the mailed info packet before we do the form. That's gone. There's no requirement for that anymore. And the Paul's draft had a really good sort of timetable in it to prevent that structural bias that you get if you front load the elections and everybody gets a ballot before the new candidates have any chance to meet people. Paul had said in his draft, I think, the forum should be held between April 17th and 27th. And of course, I can tell you that's normally what we did, all the years I was on the committee. And people did get their info packets from the village before the forum. They didn't get their ballots till election day because we were doing ballots in person back then. But, this is not just, sloppy drafting. This is a change in the entire structure of the election. And I must say, I'm taken aback that George made a statement at that Tuesday meeting that his changes were only minor, because they certainly are not. And, like everybody else, residents didn't get to see this till 2:30 today. But it was really shocking how many changes George basically asked the committee to vote for a pig and a poke. He didn't discuss any of the structural changes, any of the major changes. It was kind of, I think, a divert and distract tactic. Oh, let's talk about, changing a date over here instead of the elephant in the room. And then he asked people to vote on a plan that it was, in terms of just standard good government procedure, it was appalling, frankly. It was appalling. And I realized that, this committee was really crippled by having only two people because they couldn't talk to each other. Under the Open Meetings Act, a 2 or 3 person committee can't function because they can only talk to each other in a public meeting. Now, unless you expect people to have the time to have constant public meetings, you have to appoint 5 people. You just have to. I would urge you to do that. I know Paul was asking for that. That brings up another point here, which is about respect for volunteers, which several people have alluded to. It's really disrespectful. The committee chair comes to you and says, this is impossible, I need more people. It's really disrespectful not to do your best to get more people. It's just a matter of respecting the workload burden we're asking of people. And if they tell you they need more people, people here aren't BSers. Mostly they're not anyway. If somebody says I need more people, believe them, please. I'm asking the council to take that kind of request very seriously. And, there's so many changes here. I too will give you detailed comments. In many ways, this is really interesting. We all talk about deja vu. I was thinking I should go back and look at those community comments that 24 people sent you last year when we had exactly the same setup here, with suddenly 2 documents instead of 1. What Georgia's draft does is basically go back and take out all the good changes that the council have made. I find it incredibly disrespectful to the council. And the idea is, again, go back to committee operations. The idea that you would do an end run around your acting committee chair, who's already trying to get things done under very adverse circumstances, that anybody on a committee would actually do an end run around the acting chair who's done a darn good job and got you a draft plan that is very good, 10 days in advance of tonight's meeting, that anybody on a committee would dare to, do anything to undercut that. Just, it made my head explode. And I really, really ask you to take this very seriously.
They can make sure that all of the candidates, we can find a date that works for everybody. So there's some changes to the timeline. That was based on stuff that we discussed, but that was based on lessons learned that we got from last year relating to, we had to have the forum by a certain date, which meant we weren't able to print and get election packets mailed out so that they were with people before the election or before the forum. This year, it's very clear. The packet containing candidate statements, candidate information goes out. Then we have the forum. Then after that, to whatever extent possible, shortly thereafter. But then after that, that's when ballot packets start going out. So that was one change. And then one of the other changes from last year was a small tweak to the language related to how people who have lost, damaged, whatever, where they are unable to vote the ballot that is mailed to them. It is a change to that language to provide us with some flexibility as we work with the vendors to see if we have a ballot drop-off event. Is it possible where we can logistically and maintaining security, traceability of ballots, be able to, instead of having people who have lost those ballots come to the table and say, I would like you to mail me a new ballot? It's opening up that possibility where if it works with the vendor, they would be able to be issued a new ballot there with their old ballot and ballot control numbers being voided. It's not saying we're going to do that. That's going to be something I think we're going to have to look at what the options look like once we speak to the vendors and once we have a little better sense of what the logistics support is going to look like day of election. I know that's something Eric had mentioned, and Paul, I think you had also mentioned at one point where that's something that starts putting a greater strain on day of responsibilities because it's obviously an extra step. So that's something we want to make sure we've got the support for, whether that's event going on or, as I think Marty had mentioned, a possible one where we engage with the Community Engagement Committee to do celebration on the sidewalk as part of a candidate forum rather than on election day to ease logistical burdens on election day. So those are, I think, where some of the major changes from previous years were covered relating to the timeline. The dates moving, I think Gene had mentioned this, were small things. That was based on counting backwards to find to get back to the right number of dates. But then one change we had made that was based on, that we had discussed, was moving deadlines and nomination period from Friday to the middle of the week, giving us one where if as things come in, it's not landing and then everything has to sit for a couple of days. It's getting it in the middle of the week. That gives us a couple of days to make sure the info's packaged. It's able to be put into the Friday roundups. It's something where it's going to stand alone. So that's where I think the dates are changed a little bit because it's the nominations now open on a Monday instead of a Friday, and the nominations close on a Wednesday instead of a Friday. But so that's where some of that came from, was just a little bit of administrative lessons learned from previous years' experience and trying to reduce some of the admin burden on the manager rather than and the committee members, rather than trying to get everything turned around in 45 minutes, an hour for inclusion in the roundup. It's something where we'll have a little bit of a day or two of extra lead time to make sure we can get everything packaged and cleared through smoothly rather than trying to rush it late on a Friday.
Paul, any comments on
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make my final comments, starting with a personal and sincere apology to Chairman George. This has been a very difficult time for me. This has become such a divisive issue, this whole election plan and committee operations, that tonight I'm submitting my resignation from the committee. I really don't feel capable, and certainly I do not want to be a part of this process. And I think it'll help things. Maybe I'm the reason it's so divisive. I don't know, but there's two definite groups out there that are going against each other on this whole election plan, and I've been caught square in the middle, and it is brought me personal problems, anxiety problems, and so forth. And so tonight I'm submitting my resignation. I apologize to the committee. I've lived in this community for 55 years. I've served twice on this council. I chaired the council when we incorporated Martin's Additions, which will be the last incorporation of a residential area like this in the history of Maryland, I understand. And I think I've contributed a lot over those 55 years, and I'm not a quitter. But tonight, I'm quitting. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Paul, what can I say? I mean, I could see how you were getting pulled in so many different directions from one side to the other. And I could tell that strain already last year. And I'm really sorry. This is not the way it's supposed to be. You know, I think what I talked about last year, and I want to reinforce again this year, I don't think we have any malign actors in this community that are trying to undermine a free and transparent and inclusive election. But it seems like a lot of hyperbole is used on every side. I'm not saying there are two sides, but people, as soon as they see something that is not what they approve of, they go at it, and it's disappointing to me, and it's really disappointing to me that you're resigning. But I want you to be happy and healthy here, and not be frustrated and guilt-ridden or with anxiety because you're getting bombarded with you know, from all sides. So it's horrible, and I'm really sorry to hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love this community, and I want to do everything. And I started this process by volunteering for this committee because I wanted to make one final contribution to Martin's Additions. I had no idea it would become so divisive and so difficult. And I'm sorry, I really am. But thank you for your comments, and people, I love you. I love Martin's Additions. So I'll be around if you want to call on me for anything. Thank you.
Paul, there's really no need to apologize. I feel like we should be apologizing when volunteers feel this way. I really would truly thank you for what you said, 55 years of service to this community. And I just think it's terrible that you feel this way. I do not want, the council should encourage volunteers. We want volunteers. We really do. We are not trying to be vampires that suck the life out of people. I really feel terrible if it's caused you duress or anxiety. And then, you know, I feel terrible that your chairman or former chairwoman had to resign too for personal matters. But I am a proponent of larger committees. I say the more the merrier, especially for the election committee and the community engagement committee. And we got to get this back on track. No one should be feeling. I apologize to you.
Thank you, Katie. No apologies necessary, really and truly. Thank you for your service, and certainly Andrews and all others. It's a great community and great people. It really is. But I've just got to step back. I'm sorry.
And Paul, you may be dropping my quick comment and just like I had with Peter last year and others before, I know there's been a string of resignations over the last number of years. I won't divulge because those were personal conversations we've had, but I just will say to you, Paul, Godspeed and God bless. And I'm hoping that perhaps we'll see each other at one of Keith's events and we can have a hug.
I certainly hope so. I really do. I hope to be here for some years in the future.
Okay, well, where does that leave us here in terms of proceeding?
I think we have to introduce the draft, and will be up for discussion for the next 30 days.
Yeah, okay, so let's do that. Do we have anyone who'd like to?
I will move to introduce the draft 2023 ordinance election rules and procedures of dated 12/13/2022.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No?
I am going to say no, and I'll make this very quick because I want to make sure that my no is not taken in the wrong context. I believe that the committee has done everything possible given a difficult circumstance. And I am not here to pick sides, faction here, faction there. It sounds like some movie that I watched one time. So I guess the only thing I'm saying is procedurally speaking, and this is also where I feel strongly about, it's simply just in the ideal scenario, there would have been a voted plan by the committee that would have been circulated to the residents and they would have provided some input. And as we said, in this scenario, it wasn't possible, but it's here, there'll be 30 days. And so I'm just doing this really because I know that there were a lot of residents, or at least a core group, that spent time looking at something that was circulated, and then they felt that they came in and they put time on that. So really, this is just, I want to say, symbolic in that I want to respect the residents, but I also want to respect the committee members, and that knowing going forward in whatever that next forward is that we will do our best to do differently. And that's really all I have to say.
Katie, your vote was?
I wish I had a coin to flip. I mean, I'm really on the fence on this. I'm choosing whether to abstain or to vote. I mean, I think, it's important to move forward and to have a plan in place, but I can abstain. I'm frustrated by the process.
Yeah.
I'm disenchanted with what's going on.
It's
But
okay
I-
to abstain. It's moving forward, so you can be on the record however which way you want.
Well, Katie, I have one question for you. Do you have any issues with the plan as presented?
The only reason I would vote in favor is that I felt like there were it was workshopped a bit and we got to
What is
experience it.
workshop?
Well, he talked about it, they went through it, but I don't like the process, how it came about. I felt like some people weren't aware, and so that's why I feel
I
like.
think we can all agree on that point. I think it's important that we move forward as we did last year, because this is not set in stone. And it wasn't last year either, and we're running into deadlines in terms of getting this process moving. So 30 days, I think, is a good amount of time for us to get comments and for us to tweak and put it back into a place where people are supportive of it. And if we don't do that, if we don't move forward today, we're gonna run into time problems as we did last year. So that's
I'll vote for it, but it is not wholehearted.
okay. So let the record
Note,
state.
note
We
in the
don't need
minutes,
to state the percentage of our heart that we involve in the vote.
Yes,
We
but
just-
you know.
unless you want that in the
Wait, wait, wait. I just want to make a statement, please.
You did.
We are all, thank you for
Yes.
pointing that out, Susan. You're wonderful.
Thank you.
I just want to make a statement that as council members, we all have equal votes and equal say. I think when a council member speaks up, we don't have to make comments. Let them speak. Okay, we need to set an example for the community as well, and I think if we say a comment, it's all good, right, Keith? All good. I just want to say one last thing on this. George, I think you're there. I don't know if you're still there. I'm not asking you to come off Zoom or video, but I just want to say, with all this said, you're magnificent. I know that, this has not been easy. And this is not, again, picking sides. I know folks have resigned and all that, but I just want to say, I know you've sat there and you've listened to some things that have probably not been very easy. And just want to, for the record, recognize that, appreciate you sticking with it. And this is your second tour of duty now, and we appreciate that.
Yeah. And I just want to say, the end of the day here, again, the way things were characterized and probably will continue to be characterized, I don't think are completely fair. No one here is trying to pull a fast one on this election. I think George has an understanding, as does Paul, the timing, and we had a lot of comments last year. The ballot shouldn't come out too early because people make decisions before they hear from candidates, some of whom were new and were known to the community. So we addressed that. But I think we're all trying to figure out a path to a successful election, as we do every year. We try to have under some difficult circumstances the last couple of years. And so this outrage and maybe Paul has been experiencing this, where people are coming at him and saying, this can't be so, this is bad, this is horrible, this is an authoritarian regime that's putting this in place. It's too much hyperbole in this community. No one is trying to to undermine our free and fair elections. Can it be improved every year? Sure, there are things we're learning every year from every election where we can make improvements, and I think that's everyone's goal here, hopefully. We're gonna move on. We voted on it, we're moving on. to the next section, and that is a discussion and proposal by the Ethics Committee to expand the ethics code to include all village volunteers. Lori, please.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. During last week's ethics meeting, the committee unanimously agreed to recommend that the council consider expanding the ethics code to cover all village volunteers. To ensure transparency, the topic was discussed at the September 2022 ethics meeting and the September and October council meetings. At the September council meeting, the committee sought input from the council as to whether the committee should consider making a recommendation to the council, and was directed to go forward and consider the issue. At the same meeting, the council directed Ron to draw up potential language for said proposal. Before the committee vote at the December 5th meeting, the amendment was noticed on the meeting agenda, which included a link to a packet containing possible amendment language drafted by Ron. As has been the longstanding practice of the Ethics Committee, the meeting agenda also requested that any public comments on the amendment be sent to the committee prior to the 12/5 meeting to allow time for the committee to prepare for its deliberations. In contrast to the wealth of community input leading up to the Ethics Committee's 2021 recommendation, the committee received comments from only one resident this time, who voiced her opposition to the proposed amendment during the resident comment period at the 12/5 meeting and reiterated her comments this evening. Our committee based its decision to recommend expanding the code on several factors. First, following the passage of the initial expanded ethics ordinance almost 2 years ago, the committee has received no ethics complaints. Second, there seems to have been little, if any, adverse effect on resident willingness to volunteer based on being subject to the ordinance. Third, and perhaps most importantly, since currently all village volunteers take the oath of office and complete a conflict of interest questionnaire, applying the ethics code to all volunteers would ensure a more consistent application of the village code. As at this moment, there are no active task forces, the amendment's passage would only affect the Community Engagement Committee. I think it's worth highlighting that this year's members of the CEC were among the first volunteers to comply with the ethics oath and COI requirements and to sign up and attend ethics training. No member of the CEC has voiced opposition to the proposed amendment. At this point, I'm happy to respond to any questions the council might have.
Yeah, Lori, it's not in the draft, but both you and Elizabeth Goldberg, I think it was she, who used the word volunteers.
Right.
I think is too broad a reference. What you should be saying are appointed committees. We have volunteers, street captains. We have people who are going picking weeds in the little garden. You're gonna have people stacking chairs at a community event. These are all volunteers. So I think you want to, in your language, carefully confine it to appointed committee members.
I think that's a fair point, Arthur, and I think that Ron does just that in the language. I don't know if you've had a chance to
Yeah,
review.
the legal language does say that, but
Yeah,
I think
the legal
the
language.
broader word does perhaps give people qualms.
Okay. No, that's a good
it.
point.
That's all. That's all. Okay.
Hello, friends. I will try and make this brief and short. And I also want to, for all intents and purposes, I think, put on the table, as people know, that I have voted at every stage of the way of not in favor of the ethics committee or when it was in process. So I think everyone should just recognize that I have a fairly steady view on this, and that won't change. And I say this, Lori, with all great respect, that you have, I still think of your Venn diagram that you did, and I'm still like trying to figure out how I could come up with one that might even come close to that presentation. And Susan, I know this is something that you have cared and have championed. So I'll just a couple things. First, a couple, questions. I know it said there was a mention the council directed this. I just want to say, I certainly didn't, and I wouldn't have, and I don't know if there was a council vote to actually do this, but I just wanted to say that I certainly on the council, and I did not direct this, and I just want to put that for the record. The other piece, and it sounds like, Ron, you've engaged, so there's been a monetary piece. I don't know if it's 50 cents, but it sounds like you've also now, as part of this, have started to do your fees. And I have to say, Arthur, maybe in the next survey, we can put a question saying, if we were to do amendments on the ethics and it costs this, yes or no, would you do it? But that's a whole other story about the annual survey. So a couple things, this seems to me very settled. Ron, I know you're online, but we talked about this ad nauseum. I'm having a little, post-traumatic here, but we can pull it up. We talked ad nauseum about why and why not and who this would apply to. And I think it was very clear why we said we would not apply it to, I forget the term, was it public trust or whatever? So that's why it only applied to, I think, the election, and maybe it was also the ethics, but Arthur, you could correct me. So I just feel that this is something now we've talked about and it was settled. And so I'm really quite surprised. And Lori, again, you're always so thorough with the data that you present. Truly you are. So this is just, some of the things. I know you shared there's no ethical complaints, but if we were to really be fair, I think the number of ethical complaints we had before we had the ethics committee was also very low. I think there was like 2 in the matter of 3 or 5 years. So people could correct me.
15.
Oh, so
Actually, there were more than that. And Jeff, if I could just respond to you.
Just Lori,
yeah.
all deference. I just want to say one thing. I promise. I'm just being respectful. I just want to.
Okay.
So my understanding, at least at the time when this was being presented at the council, there were only a couple ethics complaints that then led to the ethics committee. So basically, we're looking at a couple to at least 0, but that is not an order of magnitude that is giving me, it also is the idea that the other piece of this, we are having trouble staffing some of our committees that are really at the centerpiece, such as elections, and we know people have resigned because of this. So I just want to say that it's a little difficult to discern the actual effect this is having. We can surmise that it may have no effect on people wanting to volunteer, but I would argue that we don't really know that. And maybe we need a question about, does it actually impact people from volunteering? And the final thing, I see Keith as a neighbor. I love Keith. I mean, truly, we have a bond over our kitties and all this stuff. So look, I appreciate Keith, if the ethics, if the SEC, the community engagement, if they all are for it, and they're not a controversial group, right? I think that they'll do this. So I just want to say this, that I am one vote, but I just feel that this is settled, and I feel that this is taking up time and money and resources that, quite frankly, we don't need. And I say that with great respect. So Lori, I know that you'll have your arguments. You don't have to waste them.
No, I don't have an argument. I think I just have a couple of clarifications.
Of course.
First of all, if I remember correctly, I didn't think you voted against it. I think that you abstained. But this was discussed at the September meeting. And as I recall, I was in person, but you were calling in from another meeting. And I think for some reason you were there, but you weren't there when somebody asked you a question about it. But it was discussed with the council at the September meeting. I did bring it up and sought direction. I don't know if you remember where you were in September, but this was discussed at the council meeting.
I believe I was in Kampala, Uganda.
Okay, well, that's it. So that would probably explain that.
Yeah, I do not remember a vote, but that's why I said, I just wanted to characterize. I'm just saying for the record, I certainly didn't vote on it. And like I said, I'm only one vote, so it's all good.
Right. And I think, I'm not sure that there was a vote. I think that I did ask if it needed to be voted on, and I was told no, that just to go forward. And there was a council member that asked Ron to draw up the language, which I think was consistent. I'm not sure if you wrote it, but what was I thought it was part of the original volunteer guidelines. Now, it's not the guidelines that actually made it to the website, but in one version of the guidelines, it did say that committees would review any possible amendments. So I'm just hoping to provide clarification. But back when we passed, when the council passed this ordinance, it was really decided at the last minute that they would remove some committees from the ordinance. And at the time, I thought that was a pragmatic approach. It was incremental. And now that we've had it for a couple of years, there hasn't been any complaints. Right after the ordinance passed, that volunteer cycle, I was told that we had a record number of volunteers. So that was why I made that particular comment. But there were ethics complaints before, the 2 ethics complaints that came up that are actually, if you go back through some of the minutes, they were made public at a council meeting. So I think those were all reasons why we established a procedure that provides confidentiality and due process for everyone. And as we discussed at the ethics meeting last week, the ethics committee doesn't really have a lot of power in this. It's the council who is ultimately the decision maker. The only time the ethics committee would be the decision maker is if council members needed to abstain for whatever reason. So, but other than that, this is the council. It's just the assistance of the ethics committee. So I hope that maybe clarifies some of the issues that you brought up, Jeff. If not, I'm happy to discuss them further.
Yeah, it does. And Lori, like I said, I hope you know that I have tremendous respect for you, and I hope I started off with that. And
you did. No, of course, it's mutual, Jeff.
We can have some side conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like it's, they had, when Nancy Pelosi had retired, and I think the prior speaker had said, yeah, we all get together, we may have used. I'm not trying to compare one of us to the other, but
I'll tell you which one I want to be in that scenario.
So it's all good. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Jeff.
Anything else from you, Lori?
No, I think that's it. That's, that was our recommendation. Oh, one other thing was that, and I sent this around to the council today, and I apologize that I sent it late. I hate to send things the day of the meeting. I had hoped to send it yesterday, but I had to rush up to Pennsylvania for my son before the inclement weather hit up here. It's actually been snowing all day and ice. I was planning to come today. But there is a policy in effect that requires that I'm going to say this right, Arthur, the volunteers defined as the task force, the committee members, and the statutory committees are required to fill out an oath of office and a conflict of interest form. So part of the reason that the ordinance was initially passed was that there was no mechanism if someone filled out an oath of office and didn't adhere to that. What was not made public at the time was that there was this policy in effect. And now maybe if you don't vote for this, you could perhaps rescind the policy. I'm not sure, but there is a policy in effect saying that. And between Niles and Michael, I think mostly Niles had all of the community engagement committee members this year fill out both the oath of the office and the conflict of interest form. So there is a little bit of a conflict there with the policy and with the ordinance.
Andrew, I do apologize. I just, and again, we can take this off if need to. I know Ron, I didn't do this to compete against ties. It was just one of those days for me. So I figured we'd join the tie club tonight. So my question, and again, we could take it offline if it's not immediate. Lori said something which, again, I apologize if I've missed this, but it was actually something which I've always wanted to know is the ethics committee itself. It sounded like the idea is that ethics complaints only go to the committee if the council is unable to take them up themselves, or if there's lack of quorum? Is that actually the?
No, that's not what I said. It was that the council has the ultimate authority in terms of resolving any ethics
At
complaints.
the end of the day, so if
Right,
there is an
right.
ethics, or I think we talked about this, there may be other
Right.
complaints that aren't ethics-based, which would fall outside of this.
Which would go
If
to the
idea
council.
That the council does not have any power or say when an ethics complaint is, so we don't have an opportunity to say, you know what we can do? If there's a problem on one of the committees, you know what, we're gonna step in and say, sorry, but we just think it's in the best interest that you should step down. We can't really resolve it like that. It would go through, but this is debate for another time, because I don't want to give Andrew an ulcer, and he's looking at me like
I'm
he's
listening
gonna,
intently.
he is gonna hit me over the head with the flag,
Not a
which I,
chance.
because he's a patriot and I don't want that to happen. So I think it's something we could discuss.
Yeah, I
another
think
time.
because there is,
Yeah.
what's the word? Parallel responsibilities
Yes,
here.
yes.
Yeah. I don't think one precludes the other.
I mean,
Okay,
the
okay.
council doesn't need a reason and can
No.
by majority vote remove anyone from
Yeah,
any
full
committee.
power.
That's
So,
exactly.
so that's not a problem.
Right.
Right.
And I don't think the council is in any shape or form losing control over decision-making,
Right.
even with an ethics complaint at the end of the day,
Well,
right?
only technically, and again, this is and I know I have a meeting tomorrow starting at 6 a.m. I don't know where everyone else is, but the bottom line is, I think, for example, there theoretically could be an ethics complaint sent to the committee. We don't know about that, and then we are seeing some disgruntlement on a committee. We don't know. And, we could, like you're saying, you could step in and say, sorry, we need to step down, but at the same time, there's something going in parallel. So that is sort of the thing.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Okay.
The last piece I just wanted to say, and Lori, I do appreciate this, and it's the final thought that I have is, when you'd mentioned the comment last minute changes, if I recall, remember, we didn't have a standalone, what do we call it when an open forum? So in this case, the process was we had the open forum the same day that we were actually adopting the ethics ordinance. And so it may seem like last minute, but because we don't separate the two and we have them on the same day in the same council meeting, what if there were another practice where you actually had the open forum for residents and others to comment maybe a week before or so, it wouldn't have seemed like it was last minute. But because they're combined, and again, that's fully, we've discussed that has been best practice for the council for a long time. That's the way it happened. But I just want to share with you, Lori, believe me, if it were up to me, we would have had a forum prior to that and we would have discussed these changes, because I know that Ron and Susan and everyone else that had been involved at the time, there was lengthy discussion of who this should be applied to and why. And that's why it happened on the day of adoption, because we didn't have the spacing. So.
Well, Jeff, there actually was a lengthy process where it was discussed both at ethics committee meetings and council meetings. And we went through various drafts. We made changes. We got a lot of comments from village residents, a lot of substantive comments that added to the amendment. And we made a lot of changes throughout the process. So, yeah, so that we had several different drafts of the ordinance and changed it based on feedback that we got both from council members and from village residents, and discussed it at least 3 open meetings prior to the vote.
Yes, if I recall, I made a process flow and I think we had about 10 substantive meetings and discussions and roughly about over 600 person hours, not including legal fees. So yes, I believe that there was an awful lot of thoughtfulness and energy and time that went into this. We are definitely on the same page of that.
Is this a vote to introduce Or a
Yes,
30-day review?
yes.
Oh,
Okay.
so we're actually,
So this is not
this was
passive.
not discussion. It says discussion and proposal.
Yeah,
It doesn't say anything about introduction of an amendment. So now we're talking about an introduction of an amendment?
a possibility of, not a passage of it, but introducing it as
But-
something to be reviewed.
But then it would be, if you introduce it, that means that in 30 days, it would be up for a vote.
For a vote.
Right.
So this is actually a substantive policy discussion about, just like the election plan, are we adopting an amendment and then 30-day open review to then adopt? So
Yes.
this,
So-
to me, is misleading because it doesn't say introduction of, it says discussion and proposal. So I
That's-
think
That's,
that-
that's my poor wording.
Well, possible
So-
introduction. possible-
Yeah,
We might
guess
not.
The introduction,
no,
we
that's not
didn't
the
say
wording.
introduction because we didn't know.
It's not the wording.
I think that we need to table this for another time.
100%.
People know.
So I tweaked the agenda with, this is my wording.
Yeah.
And I don't see this as an urgent matter where we can have, I can reword this for the next council meeting.
Well,
if
I
we
don't know how
decide.
you would reword it.
Possible introduction.
Introduction.
We don't have that in here.
It's not.
Instead
That's
of
what it says.
proposal.
No,
No,
that's
it
the
doesn't.
election. That's the election. That's the
Discussion.
election.
That's the election plan.
Yeah.
You're looking at the wrong.
So this is, we're continuing with a possible discussion.
Andrew,
So
I'm not trying to be divisive. I'm not.
Honestly, this is not a matter of urgency right now before the holidays. I'm comfortable with us having this conversation in January. Lori, that doesn't do away with all the hard work and
No.
Ron's assistance. And we can get there when we get there in January. I'm comfortable just moving on here. Okay? All
I
right,
think-
moving on.
I think Fine, I do have some other items on the, at the,
Yes, please. And then Ron has his hand up. Go ahead, Lori.
okay, yeah.
Thank you. So just so everybody knows, and maybe it's not a big deal, if the ordinance is introduced in January, the hearing would have to be in March because there's not 30 days between your January and February meeting dates.
Okay.
And
That's
is,
okay.
and just putting that in perspective, since it would only apply to the community engagement, is anyone here concerned that Keith is going to do something that would violate the ethics of this council
Well-
or community?
Well,
I would say personally, I don't believe so, but I just want to put that out there. If there is that urgency, I'm willing to reconsider.
I would say, then we'll move on, that the Community Engagement Committee has the most opportunity to engage in activities that would violate ethics. Like somebody who hates one restaurant and loves another, or who's going out with the manager's daughter, something like that. So, I mean, there is the, the opportunity.
You know,
Not that I
yeah.
question anybody
Oh.
or their daughter, but let's move on.
And with great love, Arthur, truly, I hope that they have a dedicated bronze seat for you forever here.
Yeah.
If I remember when the ethics had come up, the chair at the time had brought up a wonderful analogy of the ethics of that if someone went to Yale versus Harvard, if I remember, that one might pick a tree around what the Eli's felt versus the other. So just adding that to the database
Right.
of very strong ethical conflicts that we might have to protect ourselves.
Laura, you had a couple of more comments?
I did, yep. I had a couple of other quick topics for council input. First, our committee is still in the process of reviewing and tracking down the required oath of office and conflict of interest forms. Throughout the review, we've identified 2 issues contributing to the delays and missing forms. First, some of the forms were not submitted because there was some confusion regarding the requirement that forms be updated yearly. While the charter mandates that council oaths are completed before entering upon their duties of their office, the code goes further and requires that oaths and COI forms be updated by August 1st every year. We've added this information to the ethics training module, and going forward, we're going to send out a reminder. Also, second, since the notarization requirement delayed the process when Niles resigned, one of our members questioned whether the oaths are legally required to be notarized. I think that might be a question for Ron. And Ron, I think you might have a couple of oaths in your possession right now that we're trying to find.
Yes, sorry, I did scan those and email those over to Michael. So
Okay.
notarization is required for council members under
Okay.
the Maryland Constitution.
Okay.
So not required necessarily for committee members. If you wanted to excuse that notarization requirement, we could.
Okay. Well, that would
But
be
I
it.
mean, it's, and it could just be witness instead.
Yeah, because that has that's been an issue, especially as some of the meetings now have moved to Zoom. It was an issue last year for people who were participating in meetings but couldn't necessarily get into the village office. So that would be up to the council to decide, but it might be something that you want to consider, because the code does mandate that these oaths and conflict of interest forms are completed before before volunteers assume their official duties. And again, we're just looking at them and noting any conflict of interest. But if we're going to have it as a requirement, I think we should at least make sure people do it. Finally, we conducted our ethics training for this term on November 15th, and we're pleased with the volunteer turnout and level of participation. Going forward, we plan to offer training twice a year and invite those who haven't attended this year's training in early 2023. Personal apology to the council from me. I know we had discussed doing ethics training before one of the council meetings, and I've just had a really rough schedule this fall and have been out of town for about 50 days. So I haven't had time to schedule that, but we hope that any council members interested in attending the training will attend the general session in 2023. So that's it. And just want to wish everybody a happy holiday.
Thank you so much, Lori.
Thanks, Lori. Thank you.
Okay, financial matters, treasurer's
Oh,
report.
yeah,
please.
treasury report.
Mr. Chair, before we move on, should I prepare a policy to amend the forms of the oaths to remove the notary for committee members?
If there's a policy in place that requires it, and you're saying we can just add a witness, or make it just a matter of having a witness, sure. But if there's no policy in place that requires that.
There is.
There is a
There is, okay, well.
Yeah, the forms were approved by policy and actually attached to the policy, so we'd have to amend that language.
Well, it certainly would help facilitate, and I think our new village manager is still looking to become a notary regardless, but that would be helpful, Ron. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Okay.
Treasurer's report.
Yeah, we've been catching up on financial matters. Seems like every step has run into obstacles from getting into the bank, getting our credit cards, getting Michael signed up, getting the accountant to return our calls. And so this is moving ahead step by step. I think we're on the way. Next month, the objective is to have full-fledged accounts that we normally have in the treasurer's report. But that means a lot of transactions from October till now have to get entered and into the bookkeeping process. The other major news is that the amount that we got from the state income tax at the November 30th, kept saying November is the biggest transfer of the year, is the second largest we've ever received. Second only to last year's, it was $465,000. And we should be getting about 3 to 4 times that amount over the course of the year. Probably 3 times. We get 4 big payments, but they're not all that large. And just the state comptroller's office that sends us out, their comment was not for Martin's Addition, but for the state in general. These returns are typically from higher income filers and are more complex. These are returns that we are getting the money from two years ago, 1, 2, and 3 years ago. Late filers that are now going through the system. And they said, meaning a small number of late returns can have a significant impact on the distribution. Typically, late filers have very complicated, very large returns. And so that's what we are getting now from 2 and 3 years ago. So it looks good for the rest of the year. That's it.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Manager, your report.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I just have a couple things to add here. I'm excited to announce that we have hired a new assistant village manager, Erin Burns. She's jumped right in and been very helpful as we both get up to speed on everything. I did put her schedule in the written manager's report. It'd be great if you all could come by and meet her if you haven't already. She's very friendly and been active meeting everyone, so that's good. And then there's a lot we've been doing around the office, getting organized and cleaning. There's 2 additional outstanding things that are the big target items for the next couple of weeks. One is to become a notary. I did sign up and will be taking the training that is now required for that process shortly. And then the other thing is with meeting with the external accountants. I have a meeting scheduled for Monday for that. So hopefully we can get a game plan to get the last 3 or so months of books up to date. When we have looked, the last month that was updated was August. So that's a big task that's going to take a lot of work. A couple things happening in the community that we should be aware of. One is the holiday fund closes tomorrow. So please give me your checks. No cash. We did receive a $120 anonymous payment, so we'll have to figure out how to process that. We only take cash. We only take checks. We do not take Venmo payments at this point, though that was a recommendation we received, and we don't take cash.
On that point, I have a resident has urgently suggested that we return to practice from previous years, that we send out envelopes to everybody to make it easy for them to just stick it in the envelope and send it in. So that resident is my wife.
Okay.
And she said that made it so simple to, the envelope comes, it's a reminder, you don't have to write out anything, and you just lick the flap.
No licking.
No licking.
We'll take that under consideration for next year.
Mark it down, put it in the
Okay.
to-do list.
How hard would it be to have a Venmo?
Well, we used to do it.
We did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Venmo.
Venmo, like a
Venmo.
VMA Venmo.
No,
I can attest.
I don't know.
But it seems much easier to facilitate. But
Are there any
as far
restrictions
as,
why we couldn't
but
have
as far
Venmo?
as tracking the money, that could be somewhat more
I don't know.
problematic.
I would
I
like
guess
to
you
look in and do some research on the difficulties of setting up a village Venmo account
Okay.
next year for options.
Got plenty of time.
The 2022 annual survey, though late, is now out. We are using Google Forms this year, which is way easier to work with. I'm hoping to have the results published.
How many are coming in now?
We have 65 as of today.
Make more announcements, remind people.
Yes, that is open until the 23rd, and I'll make more announcements. And that's going out in our wrap up again tomorrow.
And you
Very
mentioned
top.
Constant Contact seemed to get out of the survey business.
Yeah, Constant Contact, which is our communication tool and also our previous survey tool, started glitching, and the survey tool crashed completely to the point where my complaints resulted in them discounting our service by 50% or 40%. So I'm already saving us money. I think it's $40 a month or something that I'm saving.
Michael, I have a question for residents who don't do email, or have you printed out and mailed surveys?
Yes, I think we have 17 residents that have requested hard copy, and we printed them out and sent them to those people. Yes.
Andrew, I know I've used up my time today, and I promise maybe future meetings I will defer and be silent. I do want to just say with all deference, my first statement is I know there's only a few people left, God bless you, but let's try and get as many people to fill this out, because I think the data, being someone who is a trained epidemiologist and all that, data. I do just want to put out there, and this is not the time for it to go over it, but I do hope, and the chair would agree and others will too, the most important thing about survey results and data is recognizing the limitations of that. And I just want to say, and I won't point it out because this isn't about creating bias in any particular response, but I did review, and there are some things in the final changes that went in that I believe that they deserve when before we, or as we report the results, it's important to understand what are some of the limitations of those results, because again, recognizing a survey that may only get 30% respondents, first of all, that's one piece of it. But it's also, if there are certain questions in there that quite frankly could unintentionally create a bias or a certain type of response, I just want to have the opportunity before we go through the data to just point that out so
Yeah,
that
please
other
do.
council members, can take that into effect as they think about how they may use it to make decisions.
And one of the things we added is after every question was ask for comments, so you just don't do the yes, no, or whatever, but do.
And I want to be
Yeah.
respectful
Yeah.
because the idea of pointing out a particular question now would create all
Right,
sorts of
right.
bias. So we'll talk about this when we get it
about it later.
as part of the presentation of the result.
Yeah.
And like I said, I want to encourage as many people to fill it out because then we can always talk about that as we hear what we get.
And I think
Right.
maybe in future years, we should have a deeper discussion about what questions we're asking, which ones we want to ask over and over again every
Right.
year versus if we're tinkering with them every single year.
Yeah.
I wasn't part of the writing of the survey, but you all did approve it last council
Yeah.
meeting, so.
And I've made it my policy not to actually participate, because I feel like that would.
You're a resident.
I am a resident, so I'm encouraging my wife to, and she will have to represent our home. Anything else?
We've had quite a few tree issues, but the first celebration, we completed our fall planting, including, let's see, I said 12 resident on 12 residents properties and 9 new street trees. So that's a good thing. And then I listed the different trees. We had to remove a tree that the arborist deemed unsavable on Summit, and that's it for now. The leaf vacuuming, the final leaf vacuuming will be happening next week. That's the final one for the year. So get your leaves onto the street.
Great, thank you.
I would just add, on the private trees, we planted over 100 trees, canopy trees on private properties since we started this. So it's been I think, a very positive program.
It's amazing. We have a couple in our backyard because of it, and we love it.
With the gavel in hand, I'm gonna ask for resident comments. Anyone else has comments? Larry, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. First thing about Venmo. If you look online, you'll see that there's been quite a bit. There are numerous complaints where Venmo has double charged checking accounts, and otherwise the checking accounts have been compromised. As a result of that, you'll probably discover that your own bank, I know 4 local banks such as Truist and Capital One, they have created their own type of check thing like Venmo that is safer. So Venmo shouldn't, anyway, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
The other thing is, am I right that both the elections committee and the ethics committee only have 3 members?
No, the election committee as of this evening, it only has 2 members.
I understand. What about the ethics?
The ethics is
3, correct.
Okay. So, and I think Marty pointed out before that when you only have 3, it creates, you can't function properly, okay? Nothing stops the council from changing the regulation to require that they must have a minimum of 4 members on those 2 committees. I know that Andrew, I know.
Larry, nothing allows the council to force folks to be on committees either, so we're.
Well, I understand that, but I'm more than happy to talk to you about, I understand that your comment was you did everything you could, but frankly, if you step back and use your imagination, you'll discover that there's a lot more that could be done to get volunteers than is presently being done. Let me see, did Lori say that around 2018, 2019, there were volunteers up the wazoo?
Words to that effect, Larry.
Yeah, words to that effect. I know she used the word wazoo. And so the point is now nobody wants to be to volunteer. Why? So maybe in this thing that you handed out, the survey, maybe that should be a question. Would you be willing to volunteer? And if not, tell us why. So instead of everyone guessing why people don't want to be a part of the village actions anymore, we could find out.
If I can
So
just address,
that would, no, hold it. I'm not done.
I'm sorry.
One of the issues that I looked at before Andrew and Katie were elected was how crippled a volunteer government is in truly functioning effectively. And part of that is to look at things like car thefts, vandalism, fire hydrants that haven't been inspected in 40 years, etc. And the issue of safety and then happiness, that type of thing. How are they crippled? Well, they're crippled because volunteers coming in can't give a lot of time. It's just wonderful that they're giving any time, but coming in, they have a lack of knowledge of what actually needs to be done by the village structure. They also have a lack of knowledge of historical. So Jean Sperling, we need to get this information from her. We'll have to feed her at La Ferme and then do it in that way to get her to tell us everything. But you know, a good example is the fire hydrants. Everybody's spinning their wheels, you know, trying to get the Montgomery County Fire Department to look at them, when in fact, the fire hydrants are owned by WSSC, who refuses to allow anyone to inspect them or look at them. And because we haven't come to that realization yet, although that's been known for over 25 years by the members of the village, then we could have gone to the legislation, the Maryland legislation, and gotten WSSC, forced them to allow that to happen, that we could do that with, of course, our money, which we've got the funds to do it, or to otherwise get that to happen. But again, because they're volunteers, they don't know how to go at those things, because we don't have a book that tells us historically who to contact, what's happened before, what things to avoid getting entangled in, etc. And we've got the money to develop these types of things and figure out, such as how Lori is doing, to provide this kind of information and working manual for not only the council members and committee members, but also because we seem to have such an amazing turnover of village managers and assistant managers, for them as well. And until you think about this and try to make it implemented, I think you're still going to be highly liable and not doing well for the community. The community has no true idea of what you should be doing for it. So when you ask them, how do you feel about this stuff? You get things like, oh, the garbage is picked up and the streets the leaves are blown, etc. It's wonderful, okay? When in fact we suffered for years and still do from some very serious unsafe conditions, and nothing is being done about them.
Good.
That's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Larry.
I saw Michael taking notes on the yeah, so I'm sure there's some things that as someone who's come on, we'll follow up on.
You maybe ought to create a task force to develop this. You've got plenty of funds to do that.
Great. Thanks, George, Susan, Marty.
Thanks, Andrew. So one thing, when you were discussing the survey, I know last year it was really helpful for us as the election committee. I think, Katie, I'm going to give you credit for this. I think it was you, but if it was someone else, you're getting the credit anyway. Was able to excerpt some of the text responses related to the 2021 election and share those over with the committee, which is really helpful. I found really helpful last year because some of that feedback, there's stuff that doesn't go into the election plan that's really valuable for us to know as we develop the communications plan and putting together some of the event stuff. So if it's at all possible, as the sections related to the election come in, if that information is something that can be distilled, condensed, whatever, from the council over to the committee. I know that was incredibly useful for us last year. So I would just ask for that if it's at all possible.
That sounds great. And the only thing, George, and again, that was part of my statement before about having an opportunity to also inform about the possible limitations of data, is that in that process of packaging it and perhaps sending it, that we should also have a little preamble of what some of those limitations are. So again, if you're taking it to heart around making substantive, informed decisions or inputs, thinking about how you might do some parts of the election this year, I do think it would be critical then to have a little bit of an appreciation of what some of the limitations of the data might be. And I'll keep it at that.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I did not want to imply in any way it's impacting plan development. It's where I found it useful last year was when we were doing the communications messaging, and making sure that these are the steps in the process people found confusing things, where that way we know we need to do some extra messaging to be very clear about, this is what the timeline looks like. So that way people feel we're addressing areas where people felt confused or they didn't have kind of visibility into the process. So yeah, I very much agree with some data limitations. You don't want to necessarily have it impacting substance, but especially on the how we are communicating with the village, how we are designing and pushing out kind of the messaging. I think it's really valuable.
Susan, thank you, George.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that the chat function is not currently open for residents to interact with anyone except the manager. And I didn't know if that's an intentional new choice that's being made here or in other Zoom sessions, but I noticed it at one of the council meetings, committee meetings too. And I would encourage you to open it up again, since the software can enable it and you want to have people feel connected.
Yeah, Susan, because I didn't attend the ethics committee meeting, I think you raised that during that meeting as well. I was made aware, and it's been open, I think in most council meetings that I've chaired over the last year and a half, that it's the comments and the record keeping of those make it very difficult, just for our ability then to post for on our website the council meetings, because there's so much chatter going on. The thought was, if there are comments beyond those that are made with your hand raised and us calling on you, they can be sent to either the chair here or the village manager, who then, as I have done in the past, as you may recall, when people are chatting and saying, I have a question, and I would then verbalize so that we would have it on a recording that we then use for the village residents who can't attend to hear. So, it was the record keeping part, not to disenfranchise or for your, not to be able to communicate with other residents, but just for us to be able to convey in its entirety these meetings. So if you have comments that you feel like you can't make with your hand raised and verbalize them, to put them in the chat that we will then mention during the council meeting. It just enables us to have it all at the ready for folks that double click on the link after these council meetings. That was the only thing, and this was based, I think, on a conversation we even had with Ron in terms of, I don't know, Michael, if I explained that correctly, and Ron, if you
Ron
want
can
to
jump
comment
in
on it.
here.
Yeah, sure. So several issues are presented with the chat function. And I don't know whether the Open Meetings Compliance Board has chimed in, but what the Open Meetings Compliance Board has said with respect to similar technology is council members shouldn't be engaged in individual texting, which is possible with the chat function on Zoom. And then the question arises as to whether chats need to be preserved under the Public Information Act, which can be potentially problematic. And then some towns that I represent have found that it's also a distraction, and so have preferred that there be some sort of gatekeeper for these types of comments so that the comments don't end up as a distraction online. Because this, when you make a comment to everyone, it pops up on the screen, and anyone who's attending remotely, they're reading that instead of listening to the speakers. But yeah, that might be just a matter of preference. But
Yeah, I think that's probably the weakest argument, Ron. I think it's more about, the previous two, Susan. And so, I mean, that was the recommendation. So.
Okay, thank you. I had something to say, but thank you for that. That helped me. To me, I see it as community building, but I can see the other perspectives that you're saying. I understand now where you're coming from. I wanted to say that on the survey, a couple of questions about snow shoveling, Chevy Chase at Home memberships, to say those cost a certain amount of money without stating that the overall budget is however many millions extra that we have is really a skewed question. Because, for example, I'm sure it costs money for Ron Bolt's legal consulting on the ethics, continuing to do things with an ethics committee and the ethics ordinance. And we're not having a question on do you think it's valuable or, sufficient should we do more of this ethics committee work, et cetera, if it costs X amount of money. I mean, I don't even know what it costs. It would be interesting to know how much is being spent or has been spent due to creating the ethics committee and the ordinance, et cetera. But I do think it was a tremendously skewed question. I think, you all can decide. You have the ability to vote as a council on snow shoveling and et cetera. So anyway, if you are going to ask about it and mention it costs X, you need to say we have a budget that is, Y. Otherwise, it's simply a skewed question from my perspective. I also wanted to say there was something.
Not to interrupt you, Susan.
Yeah.
Please, and again, I'm not going to necessarily be the gatekeeper, but as we mentioned before, the data is used or presented, we want to have kind of an opening of what possibly some of those limitations of the data might be. So we would welcome you sharing that. If it's that or others, please do.
Okay, thank you. And there was something said about the December 3rd plan that Paul had that was talked about or that was what was discussed in the election committee meeting. It wasn't that both plans, the other one that George brought up at the end, that was discussed throughout the meeting. It was not. And it might be in someone's mind that, I mean, I know that, genuinely that's what the new chair wanted to have passed at the end, but it was brought up at the end. It wasn't one that was throughout. And that was clearly the understanding of 5 residents who unanimously objected to that, a process issue there. So when you mentioned also what's at stake here, is this just somebody caught in the middle? We've got different factions. And I think, Andrew, you mentioned no one's trying to undermine our free and fair elections. I do want to mention that this is not a matter of personalities. One person's bad and just holds things up, and other people are good and everyone wants a free and fair election. I want to just mention that on April 16th, 2020, there was a charter change that was proposed that was not done, that quote unquote, all elections shall be managed by the election committee or a qualified election service provider as determined by the council. That would have changed the charter to make the council determining whether an election committee even exists or whether an election service provider that they choose, as determined by the council, that they choose would handle an entire election. So that would basically be taking over direct control of the elections, because a hired contractor is not independent. They directly report to the council. And this is the type of thing that has happened for several years. Thank goodness we have residents who were attentive enough to state this is not a good idea. This is a way not to have free and fair elections and not to have an independent election committee. If we did not have that level of scrutiny and people watching, that's why we get a poorer result. And so that's another reason why it's problematic if we don't have residents commenting at the beginning of committees and at the end. It really is incredibly invalidating of resident input to only have resident input at the end of a committee after things have been voted on, and then to hear that the people on this committee really respect resident input. So actions speak louder than words, and having an environment on committees and within the council that truly values and validates people's input is very important, as well as again having a council that would agree to appoint people to committees who volunteer, and not just based on some feeling of maybe they rub me the wrong way. If people have expertise in our community, I want to understand why they're not being appointed. And I think there are a lot of people in this community who are very concerned that there's a level of bias on the council where you're not choosing to appoint certain people, and it's very concerning. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Marty?
Okay, now I'm unmuted, right?
Yep.
Thanks for coming back to me. I have two sets of questions here. I'll try to keep it brief. First, on the finances. Arthur, you and I talked about the annual audit for March edition, which of course is a requirement every year. And you had mentioned that you thought the audit report would be in this December packet, and of course it's not. And I'm wondering why it's not and when we'll see it, because that's a pretty important document. And if you can answer that, then I got another one for you on the finances.
We have the draft of the audit. We don't have the final version. Has not, Michael, the final version has not arrived yet. Right?
I haven't seen it.
No, it has not. We don't have the final version. That's why it's not in. We had gone through the process. They send a draft. They say, how does this look? We said it looks fine. Now it's back to them. And I'm not sure when we usually have a presentation.
It's December.
Is it in December?
I think it has been in January in the past.
Yeah.
Occasion, maybe December some years, but I know at least.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
January.
I can follow up.
That's what's going on.
Okay, well, if you do it in January, I'd appreciate that. Second question. It goes back to the thing about the amounts that were listed in the survey. People ask me, well, $35,000, that's a lot for parties. And I say, well, we have a lot, and we ought to spend the money that we have on village services and, events, our community building. But what is the actual total of our current assets? Is it 5 million, 6 million? I know it's about 750,000 a year to run the operation with all expenses, but what's the actual money that we have in the bank? Including, we got $1 million or so on the ARP funds, right? And we've got set asides for traffic and stuff. What's the total? I just want to get a ballpark.
Roughly, I haven't looked in a few weeks, but roughly $4 million.
4 million. Does that include the ARP funds?
Yeah, it includes all the money that's in the bank.
Okay.
That's in our savings account.
Okay, and that's, so we're getting in like way more than we spend every year. And so this money is accumulating.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could take a look, I don't want to give you any extra work to do, but I'm really curious as to how that total assets, total in the bank, all accounts, has been, how fast has that been increasing? Because it seems to me our expenditures have been pretty stable, but we've got all this money piling up. So I would just like to know what that looks like if you could put it together. Again, I'm not asking for a lot.
Well, every year, that's what we have in our accounts. Whatever the excess is every year over our spending, that's what goes into the balance.
Right, I
it
do
varies
understand.
100,000 roughly the last per year, roughly.
We've had $100,000 a year that has not been spent, that just adds to the total that's sitting there.
Well, yeah, and some of that is earmarked for capital accounts.
Right, I understand.
And we are working with neighboring communities on some big ones, on stormwater and some other things that require.
Which I appreciate very much, considering the flooding on the north end here.
Well, that's why. But it requires coordination with the other communities and with WSSC. And so some of that money has been earmarked. And it's not just, some of it is just sitting there. About half of it has been earmarked for capital expenditures.
Good, that's helpful, Arthur, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one question on the election stuff. I do want to follow up on Susan's point. There is, some a lot of objective research on what makes for a fair and open election and what doesn't. And this is not just a matter of hyperbole or people being, alarmist or something. But when you have election procedures that disqualify valid voters, that's a real issue. It's a national issue on all the voter regs. There's a case in Pennsylvania now where the Republicans have asked to file a lawsuit to have 22,000 voters disqualified because they didn't fill out a date box on the back of the envelope. I mean, that is a real effect on people's civil rights, the right to vote. And we need to be very conscientious and very rigorous about making sure that we do not, in fact, adopt procedures that limit our neighbors' right to vote. I mean, it's a civil rights issue. And so this is not about people being alarmist. This is about people looking at the actual effects of different election regs. And I'm very pleased. I mean, we've had elections in BMA since 1916, and we've had wonderful, friendly, clear, fair, transparent elections. I mean, we had wonderful elections from 2016 through 2020. 5 committee members, which helped. But there's a long history here of having really good voter-friendly election procedures. And when those are proposed to be changed, it's not alarmist for residents to say, wait a minute, think about the impact of this. It's a service to the village. And I think it's essential that the council take the details seriously because the details affect people's civil rights. Yeah. And I just want to say that the characterization of like a faction of alarmists, it's really, I got to tell you, I find it insulting because that's not what I do. I look at the election regs in terms of best practices nationwide, and I do follow elections. I've been doing elections since I was 19, which was a long time ago. And so please listen to the people who raise red flags about certain provisions, because this is an objective thing. This is not just people making stuff up. It really affects voting rights.
Yeah, Marty, thank you very much. And I'm just going to close here by saying, I'm not talking about alarmists for the sake of being alarmist or maligning characters because it's one of your someone's hobbies here, but there's a big difference in being attentive, as Susan said, and thankfully we have a very educated group of residents here that care deeply. I think everyone does, and point out words that have unintended consequences and or can make a big difference. But I think the way this meeting started also kind of pointed fingers at George and trying to do this and that, and I just don't think it's fair. I think everyone's doing their best, and I appreciate you guys finding certain words that make a big difference in the outcome. I think we went through that process last year successfully because you pointed those out, and we went through those line by line, and we'll do the same thing again this year, and hopefully 1 year in the not too distant future, we will have an election plan that just needs adjustments for the year and the dates as they do change from 1 year to another. Again, I appreciate everyone's engagement, volunteers and just residents being attentive and interested and who care so deeply about this community. And with that, I would ask if someone would like to move to adjourn. Do we have a second? Katie seconds. Aye. We're adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Merry Christmas, happy Hanukkah.